ओम पूर्णमदः पूर्णमिदं पूर्णात् पूर्णमुदच्यते पूर्णस्य पूर्णमादाय पूर्णमेवावशिष्यते। तो आज हम भगवत गीता के ऊपर अपना मनन शुरू करेंगे और हम प्रथम अध्याय को लें। उसके पहले मैं चाहता हूं कि भगवत गीता का जो कॉन्टेक्स्ट है, जो परिप्रेक्ष्य है, उसको हम थोड़ा सा समझ लें, क्योंकि ये बहुत ही महत्वपूर्ण होगा कि हम जिस कॉन्टेक्स्ट में ये बात कही गई है, ये संवाद जो आया है कृष्ण और अर्जुन का, उस कॉन्टेक्स्ट को हम पूरी तरह से समझें। So I would like to go slightly into the history of Mahabharata and the Kuru dynasty. As you know, the Bhagavad Gita appears in the Bhisma Parv. There are 18 Parvs in Mahabharata. One of them is Bhisma Parv. Bhagavad Gita appears in chapters 25 to 42 of Bhisma Parv. Now, the whole context of Mahabharata is linked with Kuru dynasty and a sort of war within the, you know, what you call the family of Kuruj. The most ancient Kuru who has been traced back in time is Yayati. We heard about Yayati in one of our talks. I made a story which has been very often referred in Upanishads. So Yayati is traced as one of the most, ancient kings of Kuru dynasty. And then there are, hundreds of kings who came in between. But one of the successor of Yayati was Dushyant. Dushyant was married to Shakuntala. You know the story of Kalidas. Shakuntala and Dushyant got married. There's a very fascinating story about their marriage and how they met. And then they gave birth to a son called Bharat. So Bharat is very important king of Kuru dynasty. And then after Bharat, the very important king of Kuru dynasty is Kuru himself, by whose name the dynasty acquired its name subsequently. But it is also called Bharat once. It's also called Kuru dynasty. So after several generations of Bharat, Kuru came into power and he became a very powerful king. And after Kuru, after several generations, a king called Santanu became the king. Now, the Mahabharata actually starts from the time of Shantanu. Shantanu was married to Ganga. The wife of Shantanu was Ganga. Now, I will not go into the details of various stories associated with each of the characters in Mahabharata, but we will primarily touch upon some of the important aspects. Now, Ganga and Shantanu gave birth to 8 children. 7 of them were actually drowned in river Ganges by Ganga herself. There's a story behind all that. I don't want to go into that. But 8th child was Bhism. His initial name was not Bhism. His Bhism was given to him much later. Now, this child survived because there was some, the promise or commitment given was broken, and then the child survived, but then the Ganga left Shantanu. And then after some years, Shantanu happened to meet another lady, and she actually was another fascinating character in Mahabharata. Her name is Satyavati. Now, Satyavati was a daughter of a fisherman, and she used to have, used to take people across the river Ganges from time to time. So she was actually working as a small navigator, or what you call navika or nav. She was carrying the nav from one bank to the other bank of the Ganges. So Satyavati had her own history. At some stage, a great saint Parasar and Satyavati had given birth to a child who was named as Vedvyas. So the Vedvyas was already born to Satyavati, but when the Santanu met, that was not known that time to Shantanu, and it was not declared publicly because uh, Satyavati gained her what you call, you know, her virtuosity after the birth. That was the boon given by Parashar to her. And she also acquired a special smell which used to attract people. So Shantanu was attracted by that smell, which was very fascinating. And then he fell in love and with her, and somehow they got married. And before the marriage, he didn't want to get married because there were certain conditions laid down by the father of Satyavati, that the Satyavati's child should take the throne and not the Devvrat. Devvrat was the name of Bhisma. The Devvrat should not be given the throne should be given to Satyavati and Santanu's child. And when this was brought to the notice, somehow it came to the notice of Devvrat. So Devvrat went to the father of Satyavati and asked him why he is not agreeing to marry his daughter Satyavati to Santanu. Then he explained him that was the reason, and that is where Devvrat took two vows. First, that he will he will give up all the claim to the throne. But then the Satyavati father said that, okay, you give up the claim, but your children may not give up that claim. They might claim the kingdom later on. Then he took the second vow that he will remain celibate. He will not marry throughout his life. And after these two, vows, he was called Bhisma, and he brought Satyavati, and Satyavati became the queen. And then the story goes further down. So the Bhisma and Vedvyas, in that sense, they are co-brothers, because Bhisma was born from Ganga and Vedvyas was born from Satyavati. Satyavati became Bhisma's mother after she married Santanu. So in that sense, they were co-brothers. And then the story goes down at some stage. There are many twists and turns in the story. But finally, the children of, there were two children of Satyavati who could not give any progeny to the family, and therefore special powers of Vedvyas were invoked. He was invited to, do certain tantric or certain spiritual prayer so that the children are born, and that is how the three children. Dhritarashtra was born. He was the eldest one, but he was born blind. Then the second child was Pandu, who was fairly, weak looking, yellowish looking, that he was born. And the third child was Vidur, who was born from not from the queen, and the queen's, not from the queen, but a dasi of the queen, and that was the Vidur. So the three children were born in that process, and Vedvyas was instrumental in the birth of the three. Now the story goes further down that since Dhritarashtra was blind, though he was eldest, he could not inherit the kingdom because of his blindness. And therefore, the kingdom was given to the second child, that is Pandu. So, Pandu inherited the kingdom, and then the dynasty continued further down. And by this time, Santanu had already, passed away. But Satyavati was alive, and Satyavati was like the queen mother managing a large number of affairs. Now, Dhritarashtra, he was, nobody was was willing to give his daughter to Dhritarashtra because he was blind. But at some stage, Bhisma, who was working like a, father figure in the dynasty, since Pandu was very young, he could not look after the affairs of the kingdom, though he was declared king. But then Bhisma was looking after all the affairs of the kingdom, and Satyavati, on the other hand, as mother, was looking after the domestic affairs of the kingdom and also of the family. At this stage, uh, Bhisma went to a kingdom which is supposed to be in present-day Afghanistan, and that is Gandhar, that is called Kandhar, or now it is called Kandhar, but it was called Gandhar at that time. And he requested the king of Gandhar to give his daughter to Dhritarashtra. So the king agreed to give the daughter to Dhritarashtra, and her name was Gandhari. But the brother of the king, the brother of Gandhari, was very, very upset, who was Shakuni. And he thought that, this was injustice to Gandhari that she was made to marry a blind king. And that was the reason he finally shifted to actually the kingdom of the Kuru dynasty. He lived with Gandhari and his Gandhari children. Duryodhan was the eldest of them, and he continued to remain in that kingdom of Dhritarashtra for a long, long time, and started plotting all kinds of things. So that is where the role of Shakuni comes. Shakuni played a role in entire Mahabharata, which is very, very significant. On the other hand, Kunti was the queen. She was married to Pandu, and she gave birth to five Pandavas, the eldest being Yudhishthir, and then Bhim, and then Arjun, Nakul, and Sahadev. Gandhari, on the other hand, gave birth to 100 children. Now, there is a story behind that also. The eldest being Duryodhan, and then Dusasan, and then, many others. So that is how the children in the two, in the families of the two brothers were born. While Pandu was ruling the kingdom, after the kingdom was properly expanded and well established, he decided to take, retirement for a few years, and he went to jungle. And that is where most of the Pandavas were born. There are stories behind their birth as well. There is a story behind Kunti giving birth to five Pandavas, and also giving birth to Karna. Karna was the eldest son of Kunti, which was not known before. But Kunti gave birth to that. She had acquired a bone from, sage Durvasa, and she tried that womb, and she asked sun god to give her a child. and that is how the Karan was born before the marriage of Kunti. And she thought that since he was born before the marriage, she had to put that child into the Ganges, and then somebody picked up the child, and he grew up in some other family because Kunti could not keep the child before marriage. So that was the story behind Karn's birth. But there are stories and many stories in Mahabharata, one after another. So basically, this is the background of the dynasty. The the Duryodhana and 199 brothers, and Yudhishthir and the four brothers, the Pandavas. They grew up together. Now, Duryodhana was not very happy that the kingdom was given to Pandu, because his father was blind. So he always thought that he is the legitimate inheritor of the kingdom after Pandu's death. And that is how his claim also comes into play, because he feels that he is not blind. His father was blind, he was denied the kingdom, but he is a fully able person and he should get the kingdom. So that is how the fight continued, and he started creating all kinds of problem for the Pandavas so that they do not stay in the kingdom. So this is the brief background of the dynasty. Now, so far as the Mahabharata itself is concerned, first of all, it is the longest written epic or any book ever in the history of mankind till date. Till date, no book has been written as long as Mahabharata is. It has, as of now, approximately 100,000 verses. But there are claims that approximately 20 to 25,000 verses have been lost. And therefore, the original version of Mahabharata contained more than 120,000 verses. That is what people who have researched on Mahabharata have written. Now, there are two different versions of Mahabharata, one in South India, one in North India. There's no difference between the two, except that the verses are not in the same order in the two versions. In the South Indian version, the verses are in somewhat different order than in the North Indian version. So, but basically, the verses are more or less the same. Now, when this epic was written by Vedvyas, there's also a story behind it, how it was written. Because when he wanted to write this epic, it was not easy for somebody to write it constantly. So he needed a stenographer. He needed a person who can write. So he requested Ganesha, you come and help me in writing this epic. Ganesha put down a condition that I will write as long as you continue to speak. As soon as you stop and think, then I will stop writing, and that would be the end of it. I will not continue to write beyond that. So Vedvyas says that is okay, but I will also put up a counter condition to you. The counter condition is that you will not write anything unless you have fully understood it. So you have to first understand what I am saying and then write. So that gave time to Vedvyas to think. And then Vedvyas, whenever he wanted to think, he put up a very difficult verse so that Ganesha will take time to understand it and write. And then Vedvyas will get some time to think. So this is another interesting story about the writing of Mahabharata. As of today, Mahabharata remains the most comprehensive and the oldest writing in the world and longest writing in the world. There's no writing which can compare with that. It is said that the Odyssey and Iliad, which are the two great epics of the Christian and Greek era, Mahabharata alone is 10 times of the length of the two of them put together. So that is the size of Mahabharata. And Mahabharata contains all types of characters. It has the best of the best, it has even the worst of the worst, the evil and the good. They appear in different forms in Mahabharata in different characters. So, in that sense, Mahabharata actually represents the humanity as a whole, the world in which we see good and evil all around. All those forms of good and evil are represented in Mahabharata by different characters and in different stories. So, in that sense, Mahabharata is said that whatever is existing in the world is contained in Mahabharata. Whatever is not contained in Mahabharata does not exist anywhere. That is how it is interpreted, and that is why it is called Mahabharata, that it contains everything which the humanity can have. So the characters are, having different forms and different level of intellectual, different level of evil, different level of goodness. All kinds of characters appear. And then there are stories behind every story in Mahabharata. If you go into the story of Bhisma, you will find that there are so many stories behind his birth and after his birth and before his birth, and how he fought a war with Parasuram and how he was forced to fight against Parasuram, who was his own guru. So there are many, many stories in each characters. Now, the principal characters in Mahabharata, if you take them as, of course, Bhisma is one of the most important one. Then Vedvyas, who is the writer, who himself is a character in Mahabharata. In fact, as I said, Dhritarashtra and Pandu both were born because of his role in the process. Now, other characters, of course, we all know is Dhritarashtra, the king, his son Duryodhan, the five Pandavas, they are important characters. Then Dronacharya, the teacher who taught all the children, the Pandus and the Kauravas, he is one of the important characters. And then, of course, Lord Krishna, because Krishna is also related to Kunti. Kunti is Krishna's Bua. So, in that sense, the Pandus were basically brothers of Krishna, Bua ke ladke. So, this is how the process continues. There are many, many other characters who are important, but these are very important characters. And Vidur is very important also. He was one of the third brothers and born from the Dasi of one of the queens. So Vidur is actually the Mahamantri, the Prime Minister of Dhritarashtra, and he is a very learned guy. He has full knowledge of ethics. He has full knowledge of running a kingdom. He is a great strategist as well. So these are some of the important characters in Mahabharata. Now, if you exclude the initial period and the growing up, because there was enmity between the Duryodhana and the Pandavas from the very beginning. But if you exclude the initial period when they were in the Gurukul with the Dronacharya, afterwards, the first major incident in which Duryodhan plotted and he wanted to destroy Kauravas was Lakshagraha. The Kauravas, the Pandavas, Yudhishthir particularly, when he was already nominated as the crown prince, as the Yuvraj, he was nominated as next to the king. He was very, very unhappy, Duryodhan, and he wanted to kill all of them. So he plotted the killing in Lakshagraha. It was a town where some big ceremony in the honor of Lord Shiva was planned, where he sent them there, and he says he has prepared a fantastic palace for them to live, and that palace was made of Laksha. which can, immediately melt and kill everybody. So that was the first incident in which they were made to suffer, but finally they escaped because of Vidur's, very timely role in arranging a tunnel for their escape and managing the entire thing. And then the story proceeds and goes on and on. I will not go into the story of Mahabharata as such, but just to give a background between Duryodhan and the Pandavas, the enmity between the two continued to grow. The second phase of enmity was the marriage of Draupadi. In the marriage of Draupadi, the Pandavas did not go as princes because they had already, after the Lakshagraha incident, they had been living in disguise as Brahmins in some villages in nearby areas. And therefore they did not participate in the Swayamvar, as we call it, of Draupadi, as princes. But then they were made to participate because of certain regions, and they went there as Brahmins, 5 of them. In that Swayamvar, Duryodhan went and he tried his luck, but he failed. He could not complete that condition of, putting the arrow in the eye of a fish which was rotating on top of a rope. So there the Karna was also denied the right to do so because he did not belong to the princely class, because he was brought up into a family of a serviceman, and therefore Draupadi said that I am not going to marry him, and therefore he should be denied the right. And then finally Arjun as Brahman came forward and he fulfilled the condition and they took the Draupadi. So that was another incident. Finally, of course, the true identity of the Pandavas was disclosed at later stage, but that was another incident where Duryodhan was very, very upset with Pandavas. So these are the basic background of the enmity between the two parts of the family, the Kauravas and the Pandavas. Now, since Yudhishthira had already been announced as the Yuvraj or the crown prince, to which Duryodhana was not agreeable, finally the kingdom was divided into two parts. One part was given to Pandavas, which was practically a barren area, which was not very well inhabited, which was not endowed with many resources, but they took that part. And they started a new kingdom, a new capital there, which was named Indraprasth. The present day Delhi is actually Indraprasth. That is how there is also Indraprastha Stadium in Delhi. But historians tell us that that was the place where Indraprasth town was set up during the time of Mahabharata. And in that palace of Indraprasth, where the Pandavas started living, it was built in a very fascinating architecture. The architecture was amazing, even by modern standards, because they made certain things which look like mirrors, they were not mirrors. Certain things look like walls, but they were not really walls, they were gates. Certain places looked like, full of water, but they were not water at all. So there was some amazing architecture which was used in that palace. And when the inauguration of the kingdom took place after the Ashwamedh Yajna, the Duryodhana was also invited. Of course, they went with his brothers there. And he faced certain, after everything was over, he was taking a tour of the palace. And during that tour, he fell into the trap that he found was a mirror. There was no mirror. He hit the wall. When there was a wall, he thought it was a mirror and he could not pass. So this thing was going on, and at some stage he fell in a pool of water. And that was the time when Draupadi was looking at the movement of Duryodhan in that palace, and she started laughing when the Duryodhana fell. And she uttered certain words. वो words इस तरह से हैं कि अंधे का पुत्र अंधा. That is what she said. The Dhritarashtra was blind, and Duryodhana is also blind. That's why he fell into the pool of water. So that particular incident is one of the important causes of the Mahabharata war, because the Duryodhana was completely enraged after that particular incident, and he said somehow he has to take a revenge. He could not sleep for days together, and then finally he invited uh, Pandavas to his kingdom, where he organized a game, a gambling. We all know about that gambling process, and where finally the Pandavas lost their kingdom, they lost themselves, and then they lost Draupadi, and then there was attempt to disrobe Draupadi. All that happened in that incident, and then they were exiled for 13 years, 12 years of normal exile and 1 year of incognito exile. So that is what happened, and so that is all the background between the enemy, between the two, parts of the family, leading to great enmity. And during that incident of Draupadi, the Pandavas were extremely upset and they were angry. They all wanted to take revenge against Duryodhan and Dusasan. Dusasan was the younger brother of Duryodhan. But anyway, they left quietly, and they went back, and they went in exile as decided for 12 years. And then they appeared after 13 years of exile, when this Mahabharata war eventually took place. So this is the background of the entire context of the Kuru dynasty, the Mahabharata itself, and the war between the Pandavas and Kauravas. Now, there's another thing which we need to understand here. The Bhagavad Gita was not directly written down. It was actually told by Krishna to Arjun in the battlefield, but it was actually narrated by Sanjay to Dhritarashtra, who was sitting far away. So Sanjay and Dhritarashtra are two important characters in Bhagavad Gita. Without Sanjay's Durdrashti and his power to hear all that conversation going on between the two, we would not have access to Bhagavad Gita today. So the whole story was narrated by Sanjay, who was Sarthi of Dhritarashtra, but also his advisor, who was sitting with Dhritarashtra, who was sitting far away. And since Dhritarashtra was blind, he could not see the war, and Sanjay was narrating the entire story of the war. And in the first phase of the war came this conversation between Arjuna and Krishna. So that is where the role of Sanjay comes into play as well. Now, a lot of questions have been asked that how Sanjay had great vision and access to the conversation between the two. I think as per the Mahabharata, this was a boon given to Sanjay by Vedvyas himself. But even if we look at the technology today, it is not impossible to have that kind of access. I'm sure the human civilization had variety of technologies at different times in the history of human race, which enabled these miracles to happen. And that is how Sanjay had access both to the visuals as well as to the words which were happening at the battlefield, and particularly the conversation between Krishna and Arjuna. So this is how the whole story begins. And that is why the first verse of Bhagavad Gita's first chapter is not by anybody else but by from Dhritarashtra. It is the Dhritarashtra who starts the conversation of Bhagavad Gita. It is not started by Arjuna or by Krishna. The first verse is from Dhritarashtra. He is asking. We will, when we go into the first chapter and on our next session, we'll start with that. But he is the one who is asking Sanjay कि मेरे और कुंती के पुत्र वहाँ क्या कर रहे हैं, क्या सिचुएशन है बताइए. That's how the Bhagavad Gita starts. Now, apart from Bhagavad Gita, Mahabharata also has wonderful writings on ethics, on morality, on conduct of human being in different conditions. Particularly the Shanti Parv of Mahabharata is full of ethics, morality, and these lessons how to live a life. So this is Bhagavad Gita is of course the most important segment, but the Shanti Parv and to some extent one Parv, both the Parvs, Udyog Parv also, the three Parvas have many verses which are eternally true and which can be, in fact, I have read some books explaining some of those verses in a profound way, and they are eternally, a source of lessons for all of us. We can learn a lot from those verses. For example, one of the verses in Mahabharata says that the entire earth is not enough even for one man. Once the man acquires earth, he wants to go to the moon. If he takes over the moon, he wants to go somewhere else. And his desires continue to climb up and up and up. There's never an end to it. So, these are the kind of verses which have been written by Vedvyas in this entire great epic. And I found this epic is the most fascinating writing ever written in the history of mankind. So apart from Bhagavad Gita, there are many other verses in this great epic which are of great relevance, not only today, but they will be relevant for all times to come. So this is what I thought. Now, the problem of Gita, we will deal that with in greater detail in our next session. But the whole issue of two armies are standing there. Now there's a lot of write-ups about the two armies as well. These were big armies. They are called at that time Akshuvahini. That is the word which has been used. So there were 7 Akshuvahinis in Pandava army and 11 in Kaurava army. Now the historians and the people who are well versed about the size and how they have been calculated, there's a full table how an Akshuvahini is calculated. Like we have today a corps. Corps is made of so many divisions. The divisions are made of so many battalions. Battalions are made of so many groups, and groups are made of. We have a particular structure in the army today, that a group and then comes the battalions, and the battalions get into brigades, and brigades into divisions, and division into corps. The same way, there's a very profound arithmetic behind calculation of Akshuvahini. So one Akshuvahini, in fact, the 7 Akshuvahinis are supposed to have 1.5 million warriors. That is 15,30,900 to be precise. 15,30,900 warriors in one Akshuvahini. That is, sorry, not one, in 7 Akshuvahinis. And the 11 Aksuvahinis of Korvaj had 24 lakh 5,700 soldiers. So this is the size of the Akshvani, that is the size of the army which were confronting in the Kurukshetra war, facing each other. So you can imagine almost 40 lakh people standing against each other in that war. So it was a huge, huge army. Then there were rules of the game that time. The rules of the war are different today. Today, practically, there are no rules in the war. But that time, there were rules in the war. And Bhishma, when he was asked to take over the chief of the Kaurva army, he put down his rules. And his rules were very clear. There's a full, clear description of those rules in Mahabharata. He says the war will begin with after sunrise and end with sunset. After sunset, the people of the two sides can meet each other and discuss and resolve problems if they want. That was one of the rules. And anybody, the Maharathi will fight with Maharathi, Adhirathi will fight with Adhirathi. And the rules were set that the great warriors will fight only with great warriors and not with the ordinary soldiers. So there were many rules of this nature which were actually designed to make the war fair. And nobody will attack, one person when somebody is not engaged in the war or somebody is hurt. So all those rules were in force at that time, particularly during the first 10 days of war when Bhishma was the chief of the army. In fact, as soon as he left chief of army on the 11th day, when Abhimanyu was killed, a large number of those rules were, violated. And that is how it resulted into the killing of Abhimanyu. So those rules are also forming part of the ethics in Mahabharata. So the armies were very large. There's a full arithmetic how the army's size were calculated. And there's not only that how many people will be on the horses, how many people will be on the elephants, how many people will be infantry on their own feet, and things like that. They were all full description of this word Akshvahini. So I thought I'll mention these details because that war of Mahabharata was one of the greatest war ever fought in the history of mankind. Even the Second World War and the First World War have nothing in comparison to that war. Of course, that was in a different context. Now the timeline of Mahabharata. Apart from the whatever you read in the books and in various news items and various writings of the people, it is very clearly understood according to the what you call astronomical configurations of that time, which have been fully described in Mahabharata. According to those configurations, it is estimated that Mahabharata is approximately 5,153 years old now. The war of Mahabharata, the 18-day war which was there. There are 18 chapters in Bhagavad Gita also. The war was for 18 days, and the timelines are approximately 5,153 years. I'll give you the precise number. I think it is 5,153 or 100, some other number. I'll let you know that in our next discussion. But it is basically more than 5,150 years old history. And during that period, a lot of things have changed, have been misinterpreted, interpreted according to the context. But Bhagavad Gita has survived. The full text has survived, the 700 verses as it is. A lot of commentaries have come on Bhagavad Gita over time. There are thousands and thousands of commentaries. One of the most profound commentary was given by Adi Shankaracharya in the 8th century. and that commentary, actually brought Bhagavad Gita to the world stage. And then Bhagavad Gita was translated into variety of languages, into Persian, partially into Arabic, and of course European languages. There are certain translations are lost, certain translations existed. Then finally it went to European nations. Some of the Europeans got interested in Bhagavad Gita immensely, particularly after 17th century, in 17th and 18th century, and then it was translated into so many different languages. Today, Bhagavad Gita is the most translated book anywhere in the world. It has been the most commented book anywhere in the world. And it is a book which most people feel that it is as relevant today as it was any time in the past. So these are the great, uh, you know, facts about Bhagavad Gita and its relevance today. Of course, we will discuss more in detail subsequently. But some of the most important part of Bhagavad Gita, which I would like to highlight today, are that it tells you how you should conduct your life. It's not conducting life in general, but in precise manner, how you should behave yourself in a particular situation. That is the first part. How you should become a responsible citizen. That is the first part which tells everybody can understand from Bhagavad Gita how you become a good citizen, how you become a good family member. That is one part. Secondly, democracy. The people talk about democracy. I think the greatest democracy was practiced in the time of Mahabharata, but also in Bhagavad Gita itself. Krishna, fully knowing, and even after displaying his, Vishwaroop, his universal form, even after that, he only told Arjun that if you agree, you agree. If you don't want, you don't agree. The decision is yours. That is the real democracy. That whatever you decide, will be followed. So the decision finally was with Arjun, despite all the 700 verses, despite his universal form, despite Arjuna knowing that he is the Almighty himself who is with him. Despite all that, he left everything to Arjuna to decide what he wants to do. Even in the last verses in the 18th chapter, he says that. Then this is the greatest source of strength, because actually the Bhagavad Gita starts with a very profound observation by Krishna in the very first verse, and he tells Arjun कि आप तो कायर हैं, आप बिल्कुल कायर की तरह से क्यों बिहेव कर रहे हैं. That is one of the first observations of Krishna in Bhagavad Gita. So he tells him that you have to behave like a man, you have to behave with strength. You can't give up in a situation and run away. Running away is not the way. And that is what Ramdhari Singh Dinkar also captured it very nicely when he said that जब खम ठोक ठेल लेता नर, जब पर्वत के जाते पांव उखड़, मानव जब जोर लगाता है पत्थर पानी बन जाता है. गुण बड़े एक से एक प्रखर हैं छिपे मानवों के भीतर, मेहंदी में जैसे लाली हो वर्तिका बीच उजियाली हो. This continues further down, but basically the fact is that in a situation where you face a calamity, where you face a crisis, you have to come with your strength. You have to come and face that situation. You can't run away like a coward. You can't go away like a coward. So this is what the third, important thing in Bhagavad Gita is. And this is a message of a hero. It's not a message which is being told in ashram. It is not something that a sage is telling something to his disciple in ashram. that, behave like this, do like that. No, it is a message in the battlefield. So it's a heroic message with full of bravery, full of conviction. All that is contained in Bhagavad Gita. And then, of course, what you call it, you do things in your life for the good of everyone. You are not driven entirely by selfishness. You have to take the totality into your consideration before you decide your action. And the totality should be basically to do the welfare of the rest. So I think this is just a few points which I wanted to touch upon today, to put a proper context of Bhagavad Gita, because Bhagavad Gita is not a book of war, though it has been told in the middle of the war, but it is not a book of war. It is a book of life. It is a book how we should live our lives. And this book is as relevant today as it was any time in the past. So I think when we start next week, we will start with the first chapter of Bhagavad Gita. Now we have understood the context in which it has been said. It has been said when Arjuna was not ready to fight. We will deal that in our next book. So the most important part of Bhagavad Gita is that it is not a book of war, it is a book of life. It is a book to live a fruitful, useful life, to fight against odds, and to live with courage, to live with bravery, and to face the situation as it comes. So I think I'll conclude here today. It is just as I mentioned, it is basically a background of the entire conversation between Krishna and Arjun, and in this background, it should be understood. So I would stop here, and we will continue on the first chapter in our next session. Thank you very much.